Right now, let's talk to my first guest of this hour, who's Conservative MP for Mid Derbyshire and is a member of the COVID recovery group of backbench Tory MPs, Pauline Latham. Good morning to you, Pauline.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. We keep being told we're going to get this roadmap out of lockdown, the exit strategy announced by the Prime Minister next Monday. I have to say, there seems to be sort of talking up of what's going to happen and then talking down. And the Prime Minister is saying it's going to be very much a cautious approach. And he says it's absolutely right. We should go by the data, not the dates. But if we were looking at the data, given all the amazing data we've been seeing on the vaccine rollout and indeed on the plummeting hospital numbers, deaths, admissions in cases, the cautious approach would involve a very swift exit from lockdown, would it not?
Yes, it would. And I certainly would like to see hospitality, for instance, opening by Easter, because if they miss the Easter fortnight, then they're really going to struggle. It's difficult enough for them as it is, because they've spent a lot of money making themselves COVID secure, but they haven't used it. And of course, it's not just them, it's the knock-on industries, it's the supply chain, it's the microbreweries, it's the food people, it's everybody in that sort of chain that is suffering, and we've got to get them open.
And this is the thing, people would argue that, people who want to release lockdown to sort of get the pubs reopened, how selfish that is. You want to go to the pub and you don't care about killing granny. That's the sort of message that people get. But this isn't about people being able to enjoy themselves in the pub, although frankly in a free country, why shouldn't they be allowed to do? Is that the evidence is very clear. It's been presented again and again that there is no evidence there is widespread spreading in pubs and restaurants and other venues. That the evidence is clear that we're talking about a tiny percentage of cases resulting from that. But what also crucially, this is about jobs. People seem to completely conveniently forget that millions of jobs rely on these industries.
And lots of young people in the industry, and young people are the people who have struggled during this pandemic to get jobs. So we need them back at work so that they can progress up the tree. I mean, we've got to get people back into work for the economy's sake. Having said that, obviously we don't want to do it recklessly and we don't want to do it stupidly. But what we do want to do is do it safely. And pubs and restaurants spent a fortune before, in the first lockdown, making themselves COVID secure, but they've never been able to use it. And then, of course, we're going to have the better weather coming. And if it's a summer like last summer, we'll be able to use the outdoors an awful lot. So the risk of catching COVID after that is going to be minimal, because there'll be so many people vaccinated by the end of April. I mean, more than 99% of those people who are likely to die or be very ill from COVID will have been vaccinated. And of course, the people who've had COVID who will also be immune. So there'll be fewer people to catch it.
And yet, this is all really obvious stuff. I mean, the rollout of the vaccine has been extraordinary. Not just the numbers of people getting the vaccine, but the early data from places like Israel, they're way ahead of us on the curve, and the data here in terms of infection rates falling among those who've had time for their first dose to have an effect, the decision to have that 12-week wait to get more people vaccinated quickly. All of the data is telling us fantastic things. But when there is cold, hard data in the real world, about real people and their health, it does seem that the government scientists and indeed the government wants to ignore it. But when there's a computer model which predicts doom and gloom and more deaths per day in the middle of July this year than we had even at the peak last April, in that case we can't come out of lockdown. Why do you think the government is so hesitant about coming out of lockdown? And why do you think there's so many of the scientists who are advising them can only see statistics when they're heading in the wrong direction and seem to be almost snowblind when it comes to good news?
They only seem to see the worst thing that can possibly happen. And obviously they're worried about that, and I understand that. But we've got to look at the economy in the round and all the facts, not just the facts to do with the coronavirus. I mean, they've been absolutely devastating. And I think one of the things that Boris is very worried about is being too optimistic, as he has perhaps been in the past. So he's worried that he will go too far, too fast. But I think, given the data that we're hearing day in, day out now, we could relax things much more quickly than he is putting out there. Now, whether that's he's putting that out there because he wants people to accept that it'll be longer, or whether he's putting it out there to test the water, I don't know, because I'm not privy to that. But I feel with the data that we are being given, and of course we don't get all the data, because the scientists give a certain amount to the government that we probably never see. And I think it looks like good news. So if it is such good news, we ought to be able to progress steadily rather than slowly.
Indeed.
And yes, schools have to go back. We cannot have children out of school any longer.
For me, I've got a daughter in year 9, and not GCSE year, not at a primary where I think actually it's even more crucial. And we know that we're told that March the 8th is the earliest date that that primary schools can go back. Now there's some talk that it will be lots of years in secondary as well, or a staggered approach over a couple of weeks. But of course, then we've got the Easter holidays. So to all intents and purposes, it could be another 2 months before perfectly healthy children get back into school, even though, again, the latest study has shown, Warwick University, that actually there's no evidence that the schools have been driving coronavirus infections rather than actually representing what's going on in the community. France, Sweden, Germany, Ireland have all got their schools open and have seen that as a priority. Can I ask you just finally, there does seem to still be this ongoing issue where people who think the lockdown should continue or should be eased, over a period of 6 months or 6 years, that they're the good people. They're the people who care about people. They care about people dying of COVID. Now, we all care about people dying of COVID, but this idea that people who want lockdown to end so that people can get back to work, so that children can get education, so that families can see each other, so people can visit their elderly relatives in care home, so that we can get the NHS back to focusing on people with cancer and not just those with COVID. That somehow seems to be viewed that, again, you're granny killers, you're selfish, you just want to go to the pub, you don't care about other people's lives. Why do you think that narrative has happened? Because it seems to me wanting to continue lockdown right now, whether you're in the vulnerable category or whether you are public sector on furlough or whatever you are, to me that feels like the selfish thing, because I'm not really hurt by lockdown happening other than a bit of social life, but I can see that millions of people are hurting. It seems to me to be very selfish for a lot of people to say they want lockdown to continue just because they think it should continue, even when it's hurting so many people.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people on furlough who've been quite comfortable. They've had 80% of their earnings. Some employers have put it up to 100%, and they're not having to do anything. So for them, I can imagine it's quite a nice life. It's like being retired early. But if you're a parent or 2 parents in a flat with a couple or 3 children, trying to homeschool, trying to work full time, it's a nightmare. And the pressure on those parents is incredible to keep their children safe and sane. They can't let them out if they live in a flat. They can't let them in the garden. They need some space to get on with their role in life, which is their job as well as parenting. And those parents who are doing that, they're not teachers. Yeah. So although many of them are doing their absolute best, they're not teachers, and so those children need to be back in front of teachers. So I do think there's an element of selfishness for the people who want lockdown to continue, because it's very comfortable for a lot of people.
Do you think that if all the people in the private sector who are still able to sit and work on their laptops at home very comfortably in their PJs and miss out on the commute and quite enjoying it, if all those people and all the people on furlough, all the people in the public sector who are working from home, if all of the media and all the scientists advising the government, and indeed the MPs and the civil servants in the government, if they were on 80% of their pay, do you think they might be thinking differently about lockdown?
They might do. I mean, who knows? I mean, I'm sitting at home very comfortably. I'm in a nice house. I can go out for a nice walk every day, and I'm working as many hours probably as I would in Parliament. But I'm not part of Parliament anymore. I feel a semi-detached member of Parliament. I'm doing all the work to do with casework and people, but I'm not participating in the legislation, and that's what I'm missing. And I'm sure many people are missing the core part of their job, because you can do so much on Zoom, you can do so much on your laptop, but you can't do everything. Yeah. And the connection with people is absolutely vital. I'm missing grandchildren. I haven't seen them hardly for a year, and I desperately want to see them. They're growing up. I see my youngest granddaughter is growing up. She's huge now. She's really tall and slim, and she wasn't. She was a little girl, and she's getting a much bigger girl now, and I want to see that. Yeah.